Welcome to the HR on the Offensive podcast, brought to you by Lace Partners. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the latest HR on the Offensive podcast. It's me, Chris Howard, joining you as always on this fabulous Thursday that we release our podcasts. Today's podcast is a bit of a payroll takeover. I've got a couple of our fabulous payroll team members who have come in to have a chat about a topic that we've been talking about at Lace internally for a few weeks now. And we thought, you know what, let's go on the pod and let's actually have a conversation about it. And it's a lot around been happening with the minimum wage breaches. You've got stories in the press from companies like Greggs and Estee Lauder and EasyJet and some businesses that have historically been publicly almost named and shamed to be paying employees less than national minimum wage. And so the conversation that we had internally was how it often falls to the actual payroll team to get this right. And so we started to ask ourselves, well, obviously, this is a business-wide thing. And so what could more businesses be doing? So we're going to go into that. And in order to do that, I've got, as I said, two of our fabulous payroll team members. I've got Adrian Axtell. Adrian, how are you doing?
Hi, good. Thanks, Chris. Good to be here.
Yeah, good to have you on. And also Sara Thompson. How are you doing, Sara?
Very good, thank you. Yep, looking forward to it.
So you two are debutants on the podcast. So what I wouldn't mind doing just before we get into our fundamentally different question, if you're listening to this podcast for the first time, we ask a completely non-related HR or payroll question. And so I've got quite an interesting one this week, which I'm going to hit our two debutants with. But before we do that, I'll start with you, Sara, and then we'll go to Adrian. Could you just do maybe a 1 minute on your background for those that are listening in for the first time?
Absolutely, yeah. So around about 20 years worth of payroll experience, also across HR transformation systems implementation, have led teams globally and also managed global system implementations, both at a tactical and strategic level as well.
Lovely. And Adrian, your background, please.
Not quite as long in payroll as Sara, but over the last 10, 12 years, I've led projects in terms of implementing payroll systems, supporting businesses in improving their payroll processes, generally helping with change in the payroll environment.
Lovely. And you two are my experts that I'm going to rely on today for our national minimum wage conversation. But before we do that, the fundamentally different question to kick us off for today's pod, our bit of an icebreaker check-in, if you like. Now, I've just read an article about how Antarctica's what they call penguin post office, because it's frequented by so many penguins, is currently open. It's taking inquiries for somebody to actually run what they call the penguin post office, which is the most southerly post office in Antarctica. So my fundamentally different question, I'm going to start with you, Adrian, and then ask Sara, is if you could work in a really remote place, what was the sort of place that you'd like to go and work in?
Right. Well, it wouldn't be Antarctica, I have to say, because it's far too cold for me, blimey. No, it wouldn't be Antarctica. However, the penguins bit's quite interesting because I am a bit of a nature freak and like being in and amongst nature. So it will probably be an island in the East Indian Ocean somewhere, remote island with lots of nature and potentially a nice beach and stuff to lie in as well. So
hey, yeah. I like that. And if we can't do that, then let's just ship a load of penguins to your house instead.
Yeah,
penguin lover. So we'll do that.
Yeah, I'll get lots of chocolate bars. So I know probably.
Yeah. Sarah.
Oh, gosh. Right. So not a lot of people know this, but pre-COVID, I used to sail quite a lot, sailed across the Atlantic, etc. And one of the most difficult places to get to is French Polynesia. So I'd like to go there, and that'd be the one for me.
Get yourself to Bora Bora. Remote work from Bora Bora, eh? Something like that.
Really? Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Love it. Right. That's our fundamentally different question ticked off for the week. So let's talk about, as I framed right at the beginning of the show, there's a lot of press noise, if you like, around minimum wage breaches. So I'm going to start with you, Adrian. I think it's probably useful for us to kind of put a base layer or base sort of level question in around just, calculation of national minimum wage, how it's calculated. So can you give us a bit of an overview just because of your experience and your background for our listeners? And then if there's anything you want to add on to that at the end, Sara, then please feel free to do so.
Yeah, at a basic level, the national minimum wage it's a legislative requirement of the minimum amount to pay people at different age levels. So there's bandings across a number of age levels. From a calculation perspective, in simple terms, over a pay period, we pay an employee a particular an amount of money for that pay period, and they work a number of hours during that work period. So it's the amount they're paid divided by the number of hours. Compare that to the relevant minimum wage, depending on their age, and make sure that amount that they're paid is more than the minimum wage. In very simple terms, it works like that. However, there are lots of problems behind that. It's not quite as simple as that when it comes down to it. So if you take an example of, in our case, we're all salaried. So we're paid across a year. So our salary divided by 12, and we get the same amount every single month. Now, if you think about months in the year, then if you take February and March in a normal year, not a leap year like this year, so it's 28 days in February, 31 days in March. Actually, if you thought about it, the number of working days, we are paid the same amount of money, but we don't work the same number of hours. So if I took that simple calculation, how much are we paid divided by the number of hours, I'd get a different answer across the months of the year. Now, if there's an employee who's quite close to that minimum wage level in terms of the amount that they're paid, then there's a risk there that you might fall underneath that wage level. A very simple example, but that just illustrates some of the challenges. And one of the key bits is that not everybody is paid by the hour.
I think something else to add as well is when you say, Adrian, not everybody else is paid by the hour, a lot of people aren't just paid Monday to Friday. They are paid 5 over 7 days. So that has consequences as well.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Really, really good point as well, Sara. So, Adrian, as I said right at the beginning, there's been lots of noise, not just in the HR and the press. There's actually been quite a lot in the national press as well, nationwide, hasn't there?
Yeah. So
let's talk a little bit about why that is. Like, why are businesses being hauled over the hot coals for this? I mean, what are the reasons? Like, why is this now the new normal?
So, yeah, it's interesting, Chris, because it has actually been happening for a long time. National minimum wage is actually, I understand, it's about 25 years old. So it's not a new phenomenon. It's not something that's just recently happened. So it's been around for an awful long time. I think there's probably been a lull in the publication of this type of thing. I can remember the similar press around it. Last time I can personally remember it is 2017. But if you look at some of the cases that have just come to light, actually some of those investigations started back in 2015. Now, I think there's probably been a lull, probably because of COVID. So in terms of actually there have been other priorities for HMRC over the past few years. But now it's come back with a bang in terms of the announcement that came out last month and the number of businesses that are reported on. So it's something that's not new. It's there. It continues to be there. And it's something that all employers need to be very aware of because it continues to be. And we'll talk a bit about rates, I think, in a bit of rates of pay because they're changing again in April. So businesses do need to be on top of this.
I think about when I hear noises about this national minimum wage stuff, I often think, well, this is probably a political thing or something like that. But just from your point of view, like, what are your kind of thoughts around the reasons behind it? It's like, as somebody who's not an experienced payroll practitioner, I often think to the kind of, oh, well, somebody's being hauled over hot coals here so that it's just a bit of a story, or maybe it's a bit of a government sort of initiative to try and drive it. But what do you think?
I think there's definitely a purpose behind publicising this at point in time. It's not a frequent thing, but it happens. But the purpose is to keep reminding employers that they need to be on top of this. The background reality of it, which we'll talk a bit about, is it is quite complicated to ensure that you are being compliant. But employers need to be prepared to spend the time and effort of analysing and understanding where they've got risks, where there are potentially issues, given the various reports that come out. So there's plenty of evidence as to some of the areas that go wrong, some of the things that go wrong. Employers need to be prepared to. And let's be clear, the vast majority of employers pay people above the national minimum wage. A lot of employers have been reported on this time. The vast majority of employers are paying at the right levels of pay.
For HMRC to have named and shamed 500 employers, it tells me that there is something fundamentally incorrect in terms of how employers articulate the rules and regulations around national minimum wage. And let's not forget as well, Adrian, as we were chatting previously, national minimum wage and national living wage. And people probably get a little bit confused around the two. That will no longer be from April as well. So that hopefully will simplify things. But it is a complicated process to include all of the wheres and wherefores to ensure that that calculation is correct in terms of calculations, benefits, deductions, blah, 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 which we'll come to probably later anyway.
Yeah, certainly. So let's talk a little bit around what businesses need to actually do. Like, what are the fundamentals that they need to get right? I'll start with you, Sara, from your point of view. What can businesses be doing to make sure that they're on the right side of the law and the not getting breached?
So I think the first thing is maybe if you've got a good relationship with your payroll vendor, work with the payroll vendor, ensure that they have that compliance in place within the system, number one. I think that's a real fundamental part of the calculation and the base rate. Ensure that from a time and attendance perspective as well, that the correct amount of hours is being paid at the correct rate. And again, that's down to system. So make sure that your system really is configured correctly to calculate accordingly, and also that it is compliant against the HMRC regulation. I think that's one of the key areas.
Certainly. And Adrian, from your point of view, what are the sort of things that you think businesses need to be thinking about?
So I think let's just pick up on time and the capture of time. As I already mentioned, in payrolls, sometimes that information is not available. So salaried employees, that information won't be available. But for where people are coming into work and being paid by the hour, ensuring that the correct number of hours are captured is really, really critical to get this calculation right. And so some of the evidence that's come back from HMRC and some of the fines have been around actually not recognising that, for example, training is part of work time and therefore should be part of the calculation for minimum wage, or where there's briefings prior to employees going into work in a warehouse, for example. Those briefing sessions are part of work time. So being very clear, not just, and that information will not arrive anywhere into payroll unless at the operational end of the organisation, they really understand what people are doing in terms of the time that they're spending doing work-related activities. So from an organisational point of view, they need to understand their policies, the way they operate, to make sure that the right amount of time is being captured to determine whether whether they're breaching minimum wage or not.
And also educating those operational managers to help them understand the implications as well.
Absolutely. Sorry, when we were talking about this beforehand, you put an interesting article up, which was Talk Law. What we'll do is we'll put that in the show notes so that people can access it. But I thought it was quite an interesting one. So I don't know if you can just sort of talk through some of the bits there. It talks about the things that could possibly go wrong when employers do strengthen their national minimum wage compliance practices. Did you just want to pick out one or two that maybe you thought were quite interesting? Because you said when we talked previously, it might be a good thing to kind of chat through on the pod.
Yeah, definitely. So just through research, I came across this and it was really interesting, and it's very simple, gives you those 10 areas. I think one of the things, we've already spoken about salaried work and the calculation for NMW purposes. So I'm not going to go down that one, but salary sacrifice arrangements are becoming more and more common in terms of car schemes, cycle to work, and also pension contributions. And they made a very good point about that around these benefits are there to benefit the employee, the worker, but unfortunately, because they're deducted from source, it will deduct from their gross pay, and therefore the rest of the balance will then have to equal and take people down to below their national minimum wage if they are on that borderline where they're at quite a low salary in its entirety. So that's one of the areas I think they made a really good point about. I was really interested in that one. And also leading to from those benefits from pay, the deductions as well. So payments for third parties, even though that doesn't impact them, it can reduce pay for NMW purposes, such as travel. And if they have to pay for tools or uniform, that has to come off their balance. So those types of things, again, it's all about educating the operational managers, educating the leads and helping them understand that benefits have a detrimental impact to national minimum wage and salary.
Yeah. Adrian, from your perspective, is there anything you kind of build on that? Or in your previous roles or when you've worked with clients or in other companies, are there any of those sort of examples that you guys have come across that have been challenges? So just as a reiterator for those people that perhaps haven't read the article or haven't seen the article, it lists 10 things that could go wrong when employers and what can they do to strengthen their national minimum wage compliance practices. And those 10 are insufficient time records, unpaid hours worked, Sara mentioned deductions from pay, workers' purchase or benefits, deposits and other first day deductions, living accommodation, trial periods, uniform or dress code. Again, Sara mentioned that, salaried work. And then Sara mentioned as well the 10th one, which is those salary sacrifice arrangements. So from your side and previous sort of roles that you've had, have you come across any of those challenges?
Yeah, definitely. Deductions for uniform. Has come up again. I do remember that coming up many years ago, and there's quite a neat little description that I've seen that actually things that are for the employer's use and benefit the employer. So actually a uniform is a benefit for the employer because everybody wears the same uniform. So you can't be expecting the employee to fund that, if you like, in terms of pay. So that's quite a neat way of putting it. So if employees are and travel costs of maybe moving between one site or another site, travel costs, both the time for that travel and any costs they incur in that travel, again, that's to the employer's benefit. So therefore, that should be taken into account when considering pay and national minimum wage and time. So I think there are the nuances there around how you are the things that need to be aware of in terms, again, coming a little bit back to understanding the way the business actually operates and what it does, because these things just wouldn't come through to payroll for payroll necessarily to even know about. And so whilst it might appear, as we started off at the very beginning, Chris, talking about, this comes across as a payroll issue. Well, payroll have got this wrong in the organisation. Payroll aren't doing what they need to do. It's an organisational issue. It's the way the organisation chooses to remunerate people, chooses to employ people, or what it asks them to do. And those things all play into or can play into breaches of national minimum wage.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. Sorry, I'll let you jump in just a second. But it's an interesting one because we often talk about complexities within payroll, but actually it's business complexities. And it seems when you read those sort of extreme headlines, company X has breached national minimum wage, you immediately think, well, hold on a second, surely, it's out there in public domain. Like the uneducated person like myself would say, it's out in public domain. So what that national minimum wage is, so surely this shouldn't be too difficult. But as always, it's those complexities, isn't it? Sara, sorry, you were going to say.
There's another example. I think the biggest thing is when decisions are made from a policy perspective at a senior level, they need to understand the downstream impact on those decisions. And that all roads lead to payroll, unfortunately, at the end of the day. There was another example in terms of annualized hours, where people have been working on shifts, but then the business make a decision to change that. Instead of fluctuating hours on a seasonal basis where they go under or over, because that has an impact on national minimum wage. Well, it doesn't, because they'll get paid for the hours that they do, but they suddenly annualize those hours, then that can potentially breach NMW to a degree as well. So again, it's understanding those downstream impacts at that key decision at that level, and really having payroll representatives in place to help them understand the consequences and risks involved from a payroll perspective would probably reduce these breaches.
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, Adrian, we often get organisations come to us when they've had challenges of this ilk. And so I guess really just as we come towards wrapping up the pod today, I just wanted to get some thoughts from yourself and then from Sara on the types of things that people come to us for and how we then support them, and the types of challenges that we face and how we help them to overcome them. So can you give maybe an example or two of where we can help businesses?
I think we regularly get asked to look at payrolls in terms of some challenges that payroll are experiencing. And I think from a national minimum wage perspective, it really is helping payroll teams and businesses to understand where the challenges are, where their risks are. And you almost inevitably, I think, start by identifying within the organisation the at-risk employees, because for a lot of organisations there are many employees that just would not be at risk at all given the rates of pay that they earn. But for example, if you have apprentices in your organisation and your rate of pay for the apprentices is pretty close to minimum wage, you ought to be making sure you're clear about the number of hours they're working. So in terms of us helping and supporting businesses, we would help them to understand where their risks are and where their challenges could be.
Lovely. And Sara, just any final thoughts on that, on building on Adrian's points there?
Yeah, I mean, one of the key areas that we work on and focus on with our clients is what we call a payroll health check. And within that health check, what we would do is we would specify an area and ring fence an area around governance, risk and compliance, and also one around data, technology as well. Those three areas really have a significant impact on national minimum wage, and we would focus really quite a lot into those areas. Look at the risks and then try to give a solution-based options and opportunities and recommendations to that particular business and that organisation.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So thank you very much to both Adrian and Sara for making their podcast debuts today. I'm sure that wasn't too bad, guys, at all. But I think it's an interesting topic. It's as we said, it's a complex topic, and there's more than meets the media eye, so to speak, in terms of people being these organisations being named and shamed. It isn't just something as simple as you have a figure and you've just decided to skirt underneath it when it comes to the national minimum wage. But Adrian, any kind of final thoughts just before we wrap up today, and then Sara, any final thoughts from you?
I agree. There's a level of complexity around this that is misunderstood, I think, and at a basic level, as we said at the right beginning, it's quite a simple calculation, but reality is it's not. So I think all organisations need to be aware of that. All employers need to be aware of that and make appropriate considerations of making sure their employees are hitting above the national minimum wage in terms of pay.
Yeah, Sara?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Adrian said, and also probably note there are some organisations that are recognising that this is an issue in terms of cost of living and supporting cost of living, considering the current climate. And so a number of these organisations are committing themselves to a real living wage, which is an increase on top of the national minimum wage, and they are signing up to pay these particular rates. Now, these particular rates are not governed by legislation. It's not that at all, but they are independently calculated based on what people need to live on. And many organisations are starting to pick up on that as well and drive on that employee experience as well. So I think all credit to those organisations that are doing that.
Yeah, kind of going over and above, and it's almost that kind of, as you said, the people experience side, and how do we make sure that we can support our people and deliver on what is almost fair for what the effort they put in.
Yeah. It's growing. I mean, if you check out the Living Wage Foundation website, there are apparently 14,000 living wage employers currently, which is fantastic.
Yeah, really, really good. What we might do is put a link to that in the show notes as well. But thank you very much for your time today, guys. It was a fascinating delve into the complex world of national minimum wage. Of course, if you want to reach out to either Adrian or Sara or any of the payroll team, you can do that via our website. We've got a load of contact us forms. You can access that through our various service pages or just the contact us pages. If you'd like to listen to any more of our podcast, if you're not already a regular listener, you can do that on lacepartners.co.uk/podcast. And we'll have a variety of different insights that we also release, such as blogs and white papers and things like that. But on behalf of myself and Adrian and Sara today, thank you very much for listening, and hopefully we'll see you next time on the HR on the Offensive podcast. Bye-bye.